Annie was so right. In May of 2018, I interviewed this extremely experienced adventure traveler, and she claimed that the Dolomites adventure was the perfect trip. It was a wonderful mix of incredible landscapes, challenging but doable hikes, outstanding local foods, comfortable lodging, and interesting fellow travelers. I made a mental note to go on that same adventure myself one day. Finally, that day arrived in September of 2021. Today we'll talk about what I saw and experienced in the Dolomites, and I believe that you too will come away adding this trip to your bucket list. So let's get started. Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks. Today we are going to Italy and are going to be exploring the Dolomites. My Italian Dolomites tour started and finished in Venice, a city I didn't get a chance to visit on my one previous trip to Italy. And frankly, I didn't think I was going to like it because I'd heard it was crowded, overly touristy, dirty, and even smelly. I figured its heyday had long passed, and like so many wonderful destinations, its popularity made it a victim of its charm. So imagine my delight when I get there to find that, thanks to COVID, it's not crowded. It also wasn't dirty or smelly, and it was, in fact, enchanting. I couldn't wait to explore it. I was meeting up with Peg and Noma, who I met and became friends with because of this podcast. The three of us would be sharing an apartment in the city for a few days before starting our 9-day tour with my affiliate Active Adventures, an adventure tour company that you've often heard me mention before because I'm such a big fan. So Peg, Noma, and I had 3 full days to eat our way through Venice. Peg and Noma are exceptionally big foodies, and they helped me up my game. In Venice, I scarfed down my first black ink squid risotto. I still drool over the mini clams of our pasta dish I also had one day. We also indulged in a chocolate shop that was very generous with its tasters and walked out poorer as the vivacious salesman had hoped. We strolled the charming alleys and canals, soaking in all the sights. I absolutely loved all the colorful architecture. I would spend hours wandering the streets and alleys, drinking in all the intricate scrollwork, decorating the buildings of ochres, all in various shades of tan, red, yellow, that line the quaint cobblestone streets, which of course are often lined with utterly charming canals bearing gondoliers rowing in their trademark black and white horizontally striped shirts, accented with a cute red scarf. When our time in Venice was over, we had a taxi motorboat ferry us over to the airport where we were to meet with the other 5 hikers in our group and get transferred to the Dolomites themselves. Our hiking group included the 3 of us and then 3 girlfriends, one from the U.S., the other was a dual U.S. and Swiss citizen living in Switzerland, and a native Swiss gal, plus a married couple from the United States. Our first stop was Cortina d'Ampezzo, and you know I'm going to blow all the pronunciation, so I apologize in advance. Cortina is in the heart of the Dolomites, and this would be our base for the next 3 nights. And I like that, even though this was a 9-day tour, we didn't move accommodations that much. We stayed in a really nice hotel for 3 nights in the beginning, went into the remote countryside and used mountain huts for a couple of nights, and then finished up again in a really nice hotel for 3 nights. So I really liked that not having to pack and unpack and wasting all that time doing so. After checking in, we headed to an outdoor cafe for lunch, where we were delighted to see that there was a miniature car race going on and was just about to begin. The starting point was right smack in front of our restaurant. Some cars were so teeny that I think a couple of us could have lifted them by the bumper. With their squeaky beep beeps and much fanfare, the crowds joyfully cheered the assorted mini red, yellow, white, blue, little baby automobiles as they headed out on their rally. After a hearty meal of our choice, we headed out for the first hike in the scenic woods of Cascade de Fanes. The first hike of a tour is often a moderate hike to give the guides a chance to assess the hikers of their new group. Afterwards, we had time to explore this postcard-perfect mountain town, and dinner tonight was going to be on our own. So Noma, Peg, and I found a restaurant to check out the famous local dish, beet ravioli, which is indeed quite tasty. While there, we chatted with an American, one of the few we'd run into in these last few days. He had just completed his Dolomite tour in the reverse direction and assured us we were in for a grand time. After dinner, I went down to the hotel bar where I met a delightful Swiss-German couple drinking something in an unusually bulbed glass. I told the bartender I'd like to try one of those. It's called Gruppa. It was way too strong for my taste buds, but it was worth it for the fun conversation that I developed with Esther and her husband, who were on a motorcycling holiday. I wish I could bottle Esther's engaging smile. It was the kind that makes you instantly want to be her friend. We are now, in fact, Facebook friends and keep up that way. In the morning, we met for a hearty breakfast at the hotel. Fully sated and ready to head out, the weather for our first big hiking day was quite foggy with occasional rain. We were hiking, in fact, we were circumnavigating the Tre Cime de Lavaredo, which are 3 giant monoliths that just jut out from the surrounding mountains. En route, we passed a huge boulder that had a fossilized dinosaur footprint on, which I thought was really cool. At one peak, there was a huge array of tall cairns. Ivan, one of our 2 guides, explained that we had to build our own. I think he said it was for good luck, and we had to use 10 stones in order to do so. Our little cairn didn't last that long, but before teetering it over, we did manage to do it with the 10 stones. Clouds and mist teased us as we approached Tre Cime, and it looked like we wouldn't be able to get the opportunity to see all 3 peaks emerge from the clouds simultaneously, if at all. But even if we didn't see Tre Cime, it was still a great hike with its rugged beauty and massive surrounding peaks. We were all ready for a hot meal and espresso when we arrived at an Italian refugio, one of the many in these Alps that offer food and shelter. And these refugios are not like anything I've seen before. They are super nice with excellent homemade food. While we were sitting, briefly the clouds parted, so we all raced out to see the 3 peaks in their glory. Very cool. And just as quickly, the clouds rolled back over them once again. Bellies full, bodies refreshed, and souls enriched, we were ebullient hiking back down to our beautiful historic hotel. As we circled around Tre Cime, we would get an occasional glimpse. It was enough, and a great day of hiking and getting to know the folks in our group. On the 3rd day, instead of hiking, we biked from Cortina to Dobbiaco, on the route that used to be how you would go from Venice to Germany. You had your choice between a regular bike or, for a small fee, renting an e-bike, and I would highly recommend the e-bike. It's nice to get that little extra oomph when you need it. And since I didn't have much time to train for my upcoming Croatia biking adventure, I tried to minimize the use of that little extra oomph. But with e-bikes, you still need to work. And I have to admit, I'm a fan of e-bikes. The first half of our ride was fairly level, but with a modest incline. Our goal was to ride the Val di Lando rail-to-trail line to a beautiful, crystal-clear green lake for lunch. Our ride was going to be around, I think it was like 30 to 35 miles round trip. It was quite a beautiful ride in and of itself, sometimes going through tunnels with dramatic mountain peaks to our right or to our left, and we even had a clear view of Tre Cime once again. You also get to see remnants of World War I, as the Dolomites were the scene of a lot of action during that war. But wow, when we reached the lake, wow. The lake looks photoshopped, with a supernatural crystal green color, plus it has these dramatic, rugged mountains as a backdrop. There was 0 wind, so we also got to enjoy a perfect reverse reflection of these peaks in the lake. It was incredible. Speaking of wind, I should mention that when we went, which was the latter part of September, the temperature was great. Sometimes you wore your jacket, but it was generally most pleasant just sitting outside for lunch or coffee. This tour is offered from mid-June, when generally the snow is melted off the trails that you'll hike, until the end of September. We happen to be in the last tour of the season. But let's get back to the lakefront. The restaurant overlooking the lake was utterly charming. Flowers everywhere, bursting with colorful blooms. The restaurant featured darling regional architecture with the heavy dark wooden beams that accent the white stuccoed walls. And of course, window boxes galore, hanging baskets galore. It was enchanting. One of the things I loved most about this trip was just sitting outside at a table, having fun conversations with some great people, surrounded by all this beauty. Definitely something I could get used to. The weather was perfect for us to sit outside and enjoy the view. We got to choose whatever we wanted from the menu, and the local lake trout, after seeing that lake, that's what I chose. And boy, was it delicious. Our ride back was downhill, which is really nice after such a big meal. It was fun to zoom, too, knowing that we had plenty of juice in our bike's battery, and you could put it in turbocharge. There are 4 power levels on an e-bike. Eco mode uses the least naturally and just gives you that little bit of extra juice. The e-bikes are much heavier than a regular bike, so it's difficult to ride without being in at least eco mode, as I learned the first 30 minutes riding uphill without it. I figured it'd be good for me training-wise in preparation for the Croatia trip, but it was tough. Paul was the only one in our group without an e-bike, and he's a triathlete, and he even struggled keeping up with the group. So at our first water stop, which is at a local outdoor freshwater fountain that you'll find common throughout Europe, I decided just to switch into eco mode. From eco mode, you can bump it up to touring mode, and then for even more power, mountain mode, and finally, full throttle of turbo. Of course, the more power you use, the quicker your battery is going to drain. So you want to make sure you always leave enough juice to bring it back home, or else you're going to be pedaling a really heavy bike when you're already tired. But you didn't have to do the bike ride today, or even the entire ride, because it was really hard to get lost on a rails trail. It's just straight up and back. So if you preferred, you could just hang out and play tourist in the charming town of Cortina, shopping and exploring it, since we'd be staying at our lovely inn once again tonight. But I would highly recommend that you do go on this stunning and fun bike ride. But our cush lifestyle in a comfy inn was about to give way to staying in a mountain hut for the next couple of nights, or so I thought. On our fourth day, surrounded by the striking peaks, we were hiking along the turquoise Boit River. It was a wonderful 8.5-mile, about 14-kilometer hike with about 3,000-foot elevation gain, and we definitely earned our delicious lunch. Ivan points out that 5 languages are spoken in this area, and different valleys have different dialects. So in this area, you'll hear Latin, which is a local language, German, Italian, Swiss German, which is not considered High German, and that was news to me, and that's what my new friend Esther spoke. And so to understand each other, most of them speak to each other in High German. Again, the meal was not only tasty, but you have a huge variety from which to choose. Noma ordered this omelet, and when it arrived, it looked like they'd used a half a dozen eggs to make it. It was gigantic. The server insisted it was only 2 eggs, and that the chef whips it up with flour, which also gives it a crisp outside, because I think they must have cooked it in an iron skillet, and it was really nice looking. I'm going to have to try to duplicate that method whenever I settle down again. After lunch, it was a fairly quick hike to tonight's refugio. One thing I noticed and loved is that the refugios are often decorated with hand-carved wooden sculptures, often of faces. They are made up of old stumps or interesting burls or branches of trees found out in the woods. In one refugio, one of my favorites was hand-carved by our guide Ivan's father. Ivan grew up here in the Dolomites, and we would be staying in his hometown later in the tour. Another thing you see a lot in Italy is homemade shrines, usually in honor of Jesus or Mary. Some small, other large, but all beautiful, and most are quite well tended with candles and flowers. Sometimes you'd find one that seemed like it was in the middle of nowhere. In towns, often people would build one as an inset or an attachment to their homes. In the Dolomites, we're also seeing the last of the year's wildflowers. A fall crocus is at its peak right now, and the hillsides are literally covered in their lavender blooms. Occasionally, we even see Edelweiss, which, while you may know it from the song From the Sound of Music, you may not know what it looks like. The plant is a small, silvery grayish white, I'm thinking it's perennial, and the bloom also has 6 velvety, fluffy leaves and a muddy yellow interior. The leaves are also like a whitish gray-green. And on the mountains, you'll also see another one of my favorites, a ground thistle, which is also at its peak while we're there. And like all thistles, it's better to appreciate them without touching them, or you're going to get spiked. Back at the refugio, we put our cold, wet shoes in the expansive dry room. These rooms are great. There's room enough not only to mount our hiking boots on a drying rack, but also closet rods so we can hang out our wet gear or packs. In the morning, this heated room had everything toasty dry to start us out for our day's hike. And tonight, once again, the food was amazing. Does Italy even know how to make yucky food? And again, I was very impressed by these refugios. Tonight's was nice, as in super nice. Think eco lodge, not hut. I shared a room with Peg. Noma lucked out because she was in an odd single, so she had her own room for most of the tour. With Active Adventures, you can book as a solo and be paired with another same-sex roommate, but if there's an odd number of solo people, one lucky person gets his or her own room. which is what happened with Noma. That's because Peg and I had already told Active we'd room together, and Noma booked later, and since no other females booked a single room without a supplement, she got her own room whenever available. If Noma or any solo traveler wants to make sure she had her own room, you can book it for a nominal solo supplement fee. The married couple, Paul and Ava, of course, shared a room, and the 3 girlfriends, Annie, Trudy, and Bernadette, each had booked private rooms, which gave Noma her single. But even if you book as a solo, there's going to be sometimes occasions where you still have to share a room. This is normally when you're in a dorm-like mountain hut setting, like the time when I was in New Zealand on a remote trail. That's all that was available. And this is going to be the case on the next night here in the Dolomites. That night, Noma bunked in with the 3 other girlfriends. There were no private rooms in that refugio, just 4-bed dorms. And in this remote location, your only option is the refugio. After a great night's rest, in the morning, we hiked through a large fir forest into the Padero Valley, where we soon encountered the Livorno Range with its dramatic red and yellow rock. In this region, you'll see a lot of fir, pine, larch, and mugo pine. I'm especially intrigued by the larch, which is so durable, you don't even have to treat it when you're using it for the exterior of your house. The sun darkens it to a smoky black, and if you use larch for fence posts, then all you have to do is char the fence post that's going to be going in the ground, and you're good to go. It's amazing. The clouds are especially pretty today. High up and filled with those swirls and staccato fan puffs. I used to know the names of these types of clouds. I should go back and study it again. Seeing these surrounding peaks of rocks smattered with less and less greenery as I reach the sky, silhouetted against these dramatic clouds, is thrilling. And remember how I told you about the homemade shrines everywhere? Well, in one tree, there was a large branch that had rotted from within. And the branch had fallen off and created this, I'm going to guess, like a 16-inch high cavity on the side of the tree. And somebody built this really cool shrine with a statue inside. I think it had Joseph holding Jesus, if I'm not mistaken. It was a delightful surprise to come across as you're walking along a trail. Lunch was at a refugio. While there, we chatted with a mountain biker. Yes, crazy people actually bike up this trail, although I don't know how they do it. Most do use e-bikes, but still, I can't even imagine. And the trail is too long and too steep to use turbo all the time, so even though the refugio has a charging station, you're still going to need tons of leg and lung power. After we hike down to our refugio after lunch, there's an optional afternoon hike, or you can just chill out and enjoy the scenery. After I got settled in, our 2 outstanding guides, Ivan and Miriam, Paul, Annie, and I decided to opt for that second hike to the Col de l'Asta, where we'd be rewarded with 360-degree views of the highest peaks of the Dolomites. Everywhere you look, you are blown away by the orange and red spires, including the imposing Croda Rossa at 10,320 feet. The 1.5-mile hike up was quite steep, and the scree was a bit sketchy for a short stretch, but when we reached the top, windy and chilly as it was, the view was spectacular and worth it all. But it was way too windy and cold to stay too long this late in the year, so after a few minutes looking at the view, we took a couple photos and headed back down. I was proud of my body today. According to my phone's health app, I climbed the equivalent of 260 floors and hiked over 30,000 steps. Later in the day, we met up in the Refugio Lounge for a cocktail. That mountain biker we met at lunch was also staying at the Refugio. As like I said, your options are which refugio, not if a refugio. Bernadette invited him to join us, and we were all entertained with his hearty laugh and obvious joy for life. After dinner, we saw him sitting solo and asked him to join us as well. His name is Armin, we learned, and we also learned that he's quite the Renaissance man. I love meeting such interesting people who are doing interesting things with their lives. These are the kinds of people you meet when you put yourself out there and go on a real adventure. And speaking of interesting people you meet while adventure traveling, I want to say that I've been very proud of Peg. She needs a knee replacement, and there are times she's in obvious pain, but you'd never hear it out of her mouth. She's been a real trooper, and despite her pain and swollen knee, she seems delighted that she's come on this Dolomite adventure. And, as a glutton for punishment, she's also doing a long-distance hike in Portugal afterwards. You go, girl. Sadly, after her European adventure, Peg realized she could no longer put off the knee replacement. so she needs to back out of the Costa Rica Camino we're doing in April of 2022. So if you're interested, email me at kit@activetraveladventures.com and I'll get you the details of this epic adventure we're doing. Noma also has been a trooper. These are real mountains with real elevation changes. We're doing like 2,000 to 3,000 foot elevation gain and loss each day. In Alabama, where Noma lives, they have mountains, but they just don't get very high. So it was fun to watch Noma get stronger and stronger as the tour went on, and as her legs, heart, and lungs got used to the hard hikes, coupled with the altitude. I would guess that some days we were at 6,000, maybe 8,000 feet, and for a change, I didn't have any altitude issues. I think all the hiking that I was doing out west in Sophie, my camper van, had prepared my body. This is the best I ever tolerated being up, kind of high. But usually I don't really feel it to about like 8,000 feet or so. I'm not sure we ever got that high, but still. I'm going to go ahead and put links in the show notes for the episodes I did on training for adventure holidays, as well as training for altitude. The next day was one of my favorite hikes as we hiked out to the Fanes Cenis Brais National Park, on to the Grand Fanes Plateau, and then dropped down and over the Col de Lucia. Then we hiked down to the Alta Badia, considered the heart and soul of the Dolomites. You get to see tiny villages dotting the countryside along the valley, and you take way too many pictures. Up in the saddle, you get an amazing view and see a green-blue lake down below. The downhill, as usual for me, is harder, and I'm grateful for my sticks. They also seem, to me at least, a bit steeper going down and a bit more gradual going up. But like I said, I always prefer going up rather than down anyway. But when you make it back down, there's plenty of time to chill out by that pretty lake. The landscape today is a bit surreal and moon-like with its jutting rocks. I loved it. As we near civilization, I see a sign stating, "Here in the heart of the UNESCO Dolomites, from the Scutoni source is born the highest mineral water in Europe." And they take their mineral water seriously around here. After lunch, it's an easy hike to a family refugio down in the valley where you'll be greeted by some cute llamas. Well, maybe they don't actually greet you, but they are super cute. It's a nice place for a break before we head to our lodging back in town. When we checked into our hotel, I could tell it was really nice. It also offered a bunch of spa services, a rock climbing wall, and more. I wasn't sure when I'd have time or energy to take advantage of some of the amenities, but it would be nice to try. I did find the time to relax sitting out in the garden patio watching the sun go down, and I did so each of the 3 nights we were there. I delighted in watching the birds pick out the seeds from the sunflowers bordering the deck, all the while surrounded by the Dolomite peaks and the clear blue sky. Dinner that night at the hotel. That normally doesn't sound too good, but this hotel food was fabulous. At breakfast, we were asked to choose a preferred entree, all of which looked great. Not only did we get our choice of entree, but there was a massive buffet set out, so you really even didn't need an additional course as far as I was concerned. They must have an army of chefs back in that kitchen. And again, the food was delicious. Towards the end, the owner serenaded in the dining hall with traditional Laden music, for we are in the region of Laden. It was hauntingly beautiful to listen to the clear voice of the daughter as she sang along with her father. It was a perfect end to a wonderful day. If I thought the dinner buffet was good, the breakfast buffet the next day blew me away. Totally 5-star. I have never seen so many options. I'm talking dozens upon dozens of incredibly delicious food, from homemade breads and jams, assorted local cheeses, exquisite honey scraped from the comb, to a rainbow of fruits, a ton of vegetable selections, salads, eggs. You can boil them to your liking, or they have the chef custom prepare your dish. Every kind of yogurt, every kind of muesli, porridge, coffee, tea. It was amazing and so good and fresh, unlike most buffets. In the morning, we hiked through a beautiful fir forest surrounded by the towering giants to the Valparola Pass, where we hike the Cesas Dolomiti Range. From here, we got to enjoy 360-degree views of the Dolomites' highest mountains. We eventually had to come back down, of course. We were hiking near Ivan's hometown, and he could point out where he grew up when we were up high. Later at lunch, in the outskirts of the village, we went inside the church he grew up with, and I think he even said he even got married in. It was right next to our restaurant, where I had the local delicacy, the name of which I forget, but it's made with eggs and with sugar on top and has a sweet jam like sauce that you dip it in. Plus my local grated cabbage dish that seasoned with cumin. That's one of my favorites I found up here. And Noma, who is super tiny, has a very unique stomach. That girl can pack it in. In addition to our huge lunch, she also got the traditional dessert, which looks like a pastry pie topped with cream. I wish I knew her secret for being able to eat so much and remain so thin. After lunch was another one of my favorite hikes. While most days we were high up in the rocky Dolomites, this afternoon we enjoyed them mostly from below, and we're usually surrounded by grassy meadows filled with lavender, crocus, ground thistle, and the occasional edelweiss. But all the while, we had a constant 360 view of the towering Dolomites all around us. On these meadows were cute rustic barns and lots of little chalets, the occasional livestock. It was adorable. One of my favorite memories was just chilling out on a grassy hilltop, just admiring the view. I remember thinking, it just doesn't get any better than this. Eventually, we made it to a small farm/restaurant. A baby goat has figured out how to escape the pen. We're concerned and we're trying to find the farmer until we see that the little guy knows how to get in and out once his mama calls him. We spend a few minutes admiring the goats and then continue on our hike. Eventually, reluctantly, we make it back to the hotel. But we perk up at dinner. All the dishes that we ordered at breakfast for our dinner that night were a work of art, and they were as tasty as they were beautiful. And of course, we had that massive buffet that we could add to it. I'm going to put loads of photos of my trip on the website activetraveladventures.com. Just put Dolomites in the search bar and it'll pop right up. The food shots, of course, are going to show up great. And as beautiful as my landscape shots are, the camera still doesn't capture the beauty of the Dolomites. Annie was spot on about this tour. And here's a story I thought was funny. Noma, who is also a tech guru, has a health watch that warned her, may want to take it easy until you're fully recharged. Recovery time, 25 hours. No way that's going to happen, for tomorrow is the piece de resistance. Those that wanted to could do the Via Ferrata. Back during World War I, Via Ferratas, which are metal cables anchored to the rock along mountainsides, were put in place to help the fighting troops get around these challenging mountains. They were put either where the pathway was way too skinny to safely walk along, exposed to a deadly fall down below. If the wind catches you or your pack and you simply misstep and stumble down, you're going to die. So they had the cables there that you could hold on to make sure that didn't happen. Or if there's no path at all and you need to climb up a rock around the side of the mountain, these cables would help give you the leverage and pull to do so. These mountains, I couldn't believe it, were the scene of many a ferocious battle, and you see signs of it here and there, barbed wire, old bunkers, little memorials, some tunnels, and the like, occasionally throughout the hikes. Nowadays, people climb Via Ferratas for fun. Some have even been built just for fun, like the one Jackie did in the Quebec episode. I'll put a link in the show notes. So during the war, if you slipped with these cables, you had a chance to save yourself, as long as you were clinging onto that wire. Either you could pull yourself back up, or maybe one of your fellow soldiers could help pull you up, as long as you're able to hold on. Today, of course, it's safe. We are held with carabiners, so you really can't fall. Or you can fall, you're just not going to fall off the mountain because the wire is going to hold you. That carabiner and the webbing tape is going to hold you up. So you wear this harness, you slip it up over your pants, so it surrounds your legs, and it's got these really heavy-duty straps that can support your full weight. And so if you fall, you are strapped in, and you're strapped in twice. So even when you unhook one to go a little bit further up and you go above each anchor. So let me back up on that. So you've got the strap on, and you've got two carabiners. Everything's really heavy-duty, really strong, carries a lot of weight. And so you put one of the carabiners above the anchor. So if you fall, that anchor that's bolted into the rock, that carabiner is going to catch on that anchor, and that's going to hold you up. So as you work your way along the trail of the metal rod, you just take one carabiner off, so one's always on the rod, and then you put it above the anchor, and then you move the second one. So you just kind of inchworm your way up the trail. I hope that makes sense. And you're also wearing a helmet to protect your head. So you are really, really safe. So on this day, most of us opted to climb the Via Ferrata up Mount Avaro. But if you chose not to, you could visit a war museum and just walk around. I was excited to try it. I think I've done a pretty good job conquering my fear of getting hurt as long as I either A, have something like this cable in the carabiner, or an exposed root or a branch or something I can hold on to in case I slip, or B, I know I can't get hurt. And the harness did that for me. So I really had two things that made me feel safe. Maybe 10 years ago, and I mentioned a couple times before in shows, I went to the Miraval Resort in Tucson where they have these challenge events that help you with the mind over matter and help you channel your brain a little bit. And so they have these things that you can do that are very scary, but they're also very safe. You're always harnessed, you're safe. And so you learn to trust your body and you channel your brain. For example, there was one event where you climbed up this 50-foot telephone pole and then climbed across one 50 foot in the air to get to the other side. So you were looking down 50 feet, but I'm strapped with a cable. So if I fall off the telephone pole, I'm just going to dangle until I get my footing again. So I cannot get hurt. I can fall, but I'm not going to get hurt because it will hold me up above that pole. And I remember the guide saying, you know how to walk a straight line? And I'm like, yes, I do. I know I can walk within, so maybe like 6 inches wide. I know how to get my feet 1 foot in front of the other for 6 inches. So things like that, I've finally learned that, yes, I can do that. So I've gotten much better at conquering the irrational fears when I know I'm safe. And so in this Via Ferrata, I knew I had the carabiners to keep me safe. So when I headed out that morning, I felt pretty confident that I was going to do fine. I was thinking we'd be walking on skinny paths with exposure. And like I said, as long as there's a root or something I can hold on to, I feel comfortable even with exposure without a cable. So I thought I was going to be all right on that. But what it turned out, it wasn't paths that we were actually on. We were actually climbing rock. We were going sideways up a rock face. So this was different. And I had to convince myself that you are safe, Kit. You know how you're safe. And then once I was able to get my mind bent around that, I was fine. But that didn't make the first section any easier because I've never done anything like this before. You're walking sometimes horizontal to the side of the mountain. And most of the times you're kind of rock climbing. Like I said, you keep one carabiner always on the anchor ahead of you so that if you do fall, the most you can do is slip a couple feet before the thing's going to catch you. And that first part, it was hard just kind of figuring out how to do it. Get up on that first mound of rock. I was like, all right, we got this down. And then it was a little bit easier, and it was more just trying to get your foot placed right and your hands in the right place and moving the carabiners. And we were getting a rhythm, and they were maybe, 2/3 of the way up. And it was a really slick section of the rock side. And the rock is almost vertical. I mean, it's a little bit of an angle, but it's pretty vertical. And I simply could not find a place to get my foot or my hands. And I was just struggling. I was like, I can't, my leg's not big enough to step up to where that next place is. I'm just close, but missing it by like an inch or so where I could kind of get some leverage. And so the guide is telling me, just step back and let the carabiners hold me, which was really kind of unnerving to me to walk horizontal to a rock. And I was just about ready to do that when Annie in our group gives my butt just that little bit of push, which helped me to get that extra inch so that I could get going. So thanks, Annie. Eventually, we all made it safely to the top. I was especially proud of Trudy, who has a fear of heights. And let me rephrase that. She's got a terror of heights. I cannot imagine doing what we did with any kind of fear of heights. So good on you, Trudy. When we arrived at the top and we could see the tiny War Museum parking lot where the van was, we were exhilarated. I absolutely loved doing the Via Ferrata, and I want to do it again. But the day wasn't over yet. We still had a hike through some old World War I tunnels. To get there, we took a gondola up. It's a fascinating open-air and underground World War I museum carved into the mountain where we had a lovely lunch overlooking the vast Dolomites. And we happened to be there on the day there was a huge ultra marathon. I think these crazy people were running like 100-kilometer race through the mountains, which is around 60 miles. And I don't know how many peaks they had to go up and down. So as we're sitting eating lunch, the fastest were just arriving. And so our table's cheering each one as they passed by. And while we knew they had just climbed up this tall mountain that we had breezed up on the cable car, at this point, we still didn't really realize what they had just accomplished in that last hour or so before doing so. But after lunch, it was our turn to head down where we would soon find out. During the war, this is where the Italian and Austro-Hungarian armies dug shelters out of the mountains, transforming them into an impenetrable 20th century fortress of tunnels, trenches, and machine gun posts. A number of different subterranean routes take us on behind-the-scenes tour of some of the dramatic high-altitude battles that were fought in World War I. I think they said the route hikers now take through this tunnel mountain had 900 steps. For the most part, you're in complete darkness except for your headlamp. Occasionally there's an opening or a small lookout, but other than that, it is pitch black. We, of course, were heading down and trying to encourage the runners to make it up. Can you imagine how hard that must have been? At least when you're climbing a mountain, you can look and kind of get an idea of how much further you have to go to kind of cheer yourself on to get going. But these runners had just seen an endless set of stairs to climb in the dark after already climbing a mountain or two or three. They looked a little dispirited. Once we got out of the tunnel, they were still a long way down to reach the valley. I felt sorry for Peg and her knee. The downhill, like I mentioned, is where I most feel my knees. But she and the rest of us did it. It was a satisfying end to a wonderful day, which also happened to be my 61st birthday. I hadn't told anyone, but that clever hotel, we of course had to present our passports when we checked in. Someone must have noticed that I was having a birthday during our stay, and at breakfast, I was presented with a nice birthday wish and some homemade jam. How very thoughtful of the hotel we stayed in called Hotel Stores. But all good things must come to an end, and after breakfast the next day, we headed back to Venice. Noma and I were heading to Slovenia, which you'll hear about next month. Peg set off for a Portuguese walk. Trudy and Annie headed for Cinque Terre, and the rest returned home to their loved ones. I want to go back to what Annie said about how this was the perfect adventure holiday. Now that I've done it myself, I couldn't agree more. The scenery is gaga gorgeous, ever-changing but always stunning. You had the dramatic mountains, charming rustic villages, all overflowing with colorful window boxes, dreamy meadows dotted with chalets and barns, billy goats and cows, all surrounded by the Dolomite peaks. And the food. What else can I say about the food? I've been doing this over 100 episodes. Have you ever heard me talk so much about food on the show? And I have to mention the cool people. We had a great group of adventure lovers. We had two terrific guides in Ivan and Miriam, who obviously love their jobs, these mountains and its history, and love to share it with their guests. And I must say that everything was planned to perfection by Active Adventures. It was a great pace, filled with variety and fun, but doable challenges. We had outstanding accommodations, and need I repeat, fantastic and abundant food. It truly is no wonder I tout them. They know how to run an adventure tour. And don't forget, as an affiliate of mine, they have offered ADA listeners a special discount promo code you can use to get 5% off of any of their multi-day tours. At checkout, enter ATA5 for 5% off. And they won't let me publish the discount promo code online, so if you forget, just email me at kit@activetraveladventures.com and I'll send it to you. And when you use the code at no additional cost to you, you're going to be helping to support this show and helping to keep it ad-free, for which I'm most grateful. And don't forget, now that they have merged with Austin Adventures, another great adventure tour company, but one that offers a lot of family-friendly tours, whereas Active tours are more adult-oriented, you can use the same promo code, but until they get their computers all meshed and all that, you'll need to email them or talk to them in order to use the promo code until this gets set up. And I think you can tell by my enthusiasm that I endured my Dolomite adventure, and I hope that I've whet your appetite to do it yourself. Whether it's hiking the Dolomites or you have other regions that you wish to explore, don't forget to check out the Active Travel Adventures website. For each episode, and this is number 103, there's a dedicated page showing you details and photos of what to expect so you can see if something is the right place for your next adventure. There's an easy-to-use search bar that allows you to look for adventures by region, time of year, activity, and more. Be sure to check it out and let me know what you think. I hope you've enjoyed hiking the Dolomites with me today. Ciao! Until next time, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on!